Good morning and welcome to Classroom to Career with the Education Foundation of TRA. I have with me today Gretchen from DairyMax and Glen Harrington from Dairy Farmers of America. So a word real quick about this series. This is our Classroom to Career series. We've started it last fall, and each of these episodes runs about 45 minutes to an hour. We have them taped, and they will run on our txrestaurant.org website. You can find them under TRA and ProStart and then resources. So these are great things to play back later in the school year for your teachers. So if you have questions, please just put them in the comment box and I will get to those at the appropriate time. I want to go ahead and welcome and introduce our presenters today. Again, we have Gretchen Crichton. Am I pronouncing that right, Gretchen? Okay, thanks. She's the Director of Industry Partnerships with DairyMax. You may recognize her. She's done a previous Classroom to Career on a different subject in the dairy world with us. So we welcome her back. She's worked in the foods career for a long time, started her career at McDonald's in marketing, and worked with many of the franchises to get their opening day programs going. Then she decided to stay home and raise her boys for a few years, which after I'm sure probably 12 years, she was ready to get back into the working career. I know how that is. And she found her way with DairyMax in 2016. And she loves to volunteer at her community garden and grow fresh vegetables. And she's got some great information for us. Welcome, Gretchen. Glen Harrington is the Director of Sales South Texas for the Dairy Farmers of America, Dairy Browns. He began his 45-year career in dairy at Texas A&M in Dr. Dill's protein chemistry lab. So I talked to him earlier and he said he's an old ag. So, you know, welcome from some of the new Aggies that are coming in. It's still a great, great college. Glen joined Gordon Dairy Company in 1994, and for the next 25 years, he was general manager, regional manager, director of operations in the Southern U.S. He's thinking about retirement, looking forward to raising cattle and vegetables in the near future with his wife and their home in Taylor, Texas. So we were talking just a minute ago before we all started and just talking about how, you know, we're so hopeful that many of the Texas schools can stay open and that our high school students can continue to learn in person. It's such an amazing thing. And I think we've taken it for granted. So welcome back. And at that, I will turn it over to you, Gretchen, and have a great episode.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm going to share my screen here and get going on the presentation. And as Susan mentioned, if you have questions along the way, please pop those in the chat. This is very informal. We do want questions, and Glen and I will do our best to answer them. And really, we're going to start with kind of a look at the dairy industry overall, and then get into processing. And hopefully, there we go. So we were already introduced. So as Susan mentioned, I'm Gretchen Crichton, and I work for DairyMax, which is the checkoff program for dairy. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means, because it can be a little bit confusing. And then Glen works for Oak Farms. You guys know that brand, hopefully, from a milk product standpoint, and then Hygia brand, which is in the South Texas area. So he's going to cover dairy processing, and he'll have the bulk of the presentation. And then he'll also end it with careers, because we know this is a classroom to career presentation. So he'll go over the careers that are in dairy processing, and you might be surprised to hear what's available in dairy processing. So a little bit about DairyMax. We are, as I mentioned, the checkoff program. What is checkoff? So dairy farm families within the 8-state footprint that we cover actually pay into a fund that we use to promote dairy. So milk, cheese, and yogurt. I know we all love cheese in those recipes and whatnot. So it's a very rewarding job. Milk is one of the most nutritious products, and we'll go into that a little bit. And milk is actually in 94% of American households. It's a great product, and we're very proud of it being very well used. So I'm going to go through a couple of facts within the dairy industry that you may not know, specific to Texas. So there are 360 dairy farms in Texas. There are about 595,000 milk cows in the state. The average herd size in Texas is about 1,600 cows. So that's the average. So you'll have smaller farms and you'll have a little bit bigger farms. The average milk per cow is about 2,898 pounds per year, or about 8 gallons per day that one dairy cow can produce a day. And you may not know this, but a gallon of milk weighs 8.6 pounds. So just a little interesting fact there. In 2020, the cost of a dairy cow in Texas was about $1,736. And as you all may know and be experiencing within the supply chain right now, especially at the grocery stores and cost inflation, dairy farmers are also experiencing that too. They're seeing their feed costs go up across the board. They're having labor issues as well. So it's something that's affecting everything from the farm level to the store. And I know Glenn will be able to talk about that from a processing standpoint. Texas is actually the 5th largest dairy producing state. Haley's going to pop up a poll here. What do you think is the top dairy producing state? Texas is the 5th. So what state do you think is the top dairy producing state? So go ahead and log your answers and we'll kind of see how that poll plays out. So as we are logging in some of those answers, we'll kind of go through what came out of that poll. But as we wait for those answers to come in, a little bit about cow comfort. I know there's a lot of misconceptions about dairy farming in general. Dairy farmers, their cows are their assets, if you think about it. So if their cows are not feeling good or not well taken care of, those dairy farmers lose money. So it's important for them and critical for them that their cows get the utmost care. So they really are, they are adamant about good medical care for their cows and also healthy living conditions. Many cows have nutritionists, if you can believe that. So as a cow goes through their life cycle, they need different food for where they're at. So if a cow's about to calve, and that means if they're about to have a baby, they're going to have a little bit different food or ration than a cow that's not pregnant. So it's very important for dairy farmers to stay on top of that. And let's see, the poll, 4 groups said Wisconsin, close, and 1 group said California. So the answer is actually California. Wisconsin is second. That's just some facts. So California is first, Wisconsin is second, then it goes Idaho, New York, and Texas. And a fun fact is Texas is about to surpass New York as the 4th dairy producing state. So just a little fun fact there. And then when we talk about sustainability, that's obviously something that's very important and foremost in consumers' minds. Environmental care is also very important to dairy farmers. If the land's not taken care of, they don't have the land to actually raise their cows. So dairy actually contributes 2% of the total US greenhouse gas emissions. 80% of a cow's diet, again, I talked about those rations and that nutritionist that those cows have. 80% of that diet is not consumable by humans. So those items would end up in a landfill, so such as cottonseed hulls. So we have a lot of cotton farms within Texas. Those hulls would be put in a landfill, but they are used actually and ground up for rations for dairy cows. Almond shells, same thing, and brewer's grain. So you may not know that, but those are some things that would otherwise be, basically go in a landfill. They're actually fed to cows, and those cows actually use that food to produce, milk. And then advances in animal care and breeding have really resulted in more milk being produced today with less cows. So if you think about it, so we have 9 million cows compared to 1944 where we had 26 million cows. So overall, if you have less cows, you're using less land, less manure, less water. So really those advances in animal care and breeding has ultimately helped within the environmental concerns and whatnot. So just some facts in terms of sustainability. And now I'm going to pass it over to Glenn. He's going to go through dairy processing, a little bit more details into what that entails. So we're taking it from the farm where they actually pick up the milk in the tankers and go to the dairy processing plant. So I'll pass it over to Glenn to talk about dairy processing.
Thank you. Good morning. Before I get started, I wanted to say thank you to Gretchen for all you and your DairyMax team do for all of us in dairy processing in the industry. I appreciate the invitation, the opportunity to join you. And Susan and Haley, thank you guys too, and TRA. What a great program this is. So it's a real honor to participate today. TRA members are great customers of ours, but I also, on a personal level, enjoy dining with your TRA members too. So I'm really glad as a state that we're open at the moment and hope things can stay that way. I know we all do. So when you think about dairy, it really, and really, I think any agricultural product, you go to the grocery store, you look for food. A lot of times we don't really know where it all comes from, but in almost all cases, it starts on the farm. And so if you can envision yourself being a farmer, certainly a smaller farmer might be able to sell all of their stuff in a farmer's market, or maybe in some cases, some of the restaurants are real big about partnering with farms. But once you start getting into a bigger scale, one of your bigger challenges, you've got a lot of stuff invested, you've got a lot of time invested, a lot of money tied up. You got to sell your stuff. In the case of dairy in particular, if you know anything about cows, once they are in their milking cycle, they've got to keep milking. If they stop, they pretty much get out of the cycle, and that can be an extremely costly thing. So one of the biggest challenges on a farm is, how do I keep my stuff, in our case milk, how do I keep my products moving? So I've got this a little bit out of order. Typically, the types of dairy processing plants where I've got in the third bullet point is really where it would start, because that's where the farmers would typically get the most for their milk. Fluid milk, cheese, actually fresh fluid milk, ice cream, and some things like some of the longer shelf life items. And so they'll sell all of that they can and get the highest price they can. But generally, in most cases, they're going to have some left. And what they have left has got to go somewhere. And so I wanted to talk for a second about this, the function of marketing co-ops and what they actually do. And our company is now owned by a marketing co-op. And it's really a positive trend in the industry, in my opinion, for the industry in general, but for the farmers specifically. So what the co-op does is essentially help the farmer market their milk. And some of the things Gretchen talked about, I think they also have arms where they'll help with environmental issues and sustainability issues and things like that too. And they do a lot of great work there. But one of the primary functions is to help the farmer market their milk. So whatever doesn't sell is going to spoil or get poured out into a field or go somewhere. And so the best way for them to store product, a lot of people call that commodities, is to turn it into butter, cheese, or milk powder. There's commodity programs actually in some of your schools, I think, where some of that gets used. So that is really essentially what a co-op will do is help move this through. And now since they've got involved and they own us, they actually are part of fluid processing too. So to just take a quick look at DFA, there's approximately 87 plants nationwide. You can see a number of different colors there, everything from ingredients, if you've ever had a protein drink, to probably, I think they're still doing some of the Starbucks drinks in a jar with flavors and creams. Most of the blue dots are fresh fluid plants, which is what I work with. And then if you zero down to Texas, I'm in the San Antonio division, and we work San Antonio, Austin, and South. So it's a quick snapshot. At the end, there's email addresses. If anybody's got an interest in something related to our organization and whatever, you'll send me an email. I'll do my best to help you get introduced where you want to go. But anyway, that's DFA. And then what Gretchen asked me to do is talk a little bit about my journey into dairy. So I guess a lot of you are probably at that spot in the road now where you're getting ready to exit high school at some point. You know, I was in that same role a long time ago. And honestly, I knew I wanted to do something in agriculture because both of my grandparents were farmers and I just really liked it, but I didn't really have any idea what. So Texas A&M seemed like a great place to go based on what I heard. And so I went off to Texas A&M with the thought of a general ag degree. And I was actually in a meat science class, and the professor made a comment one day that he had heard that there were dairy jobs available. Anyone interested? I thought, well, going to college, I think the end result is to get a job. I think I'll wander over there. And so I did. And it actually worked out very well for me. I met Dr. C.W. Dillon, went to work in his protein chemistry lab and worked there till I graduated from A&M. At that point, I was in a technical role and a technical background. And so the logical place for me to go, and I started with Dean Foods in a quality assurance role and basically did that job for a period of time in that role. And we'll see some slides in a minute. But in that role, primarily my function was to make sure that the product coming in and going out met our standards, and really had very little to do with the productivity of the plant. It was more about making sure everything was right. Probably because things happen and opportunities come up, it wasn't long before I had the opportunity to move into the production side. And so my role shifted, although quality was very much an important part of my role. I had a QA manager that was helping me keep between the lines there. My role became, how do I get this stuff through here on time to meet the orders? And so again, when we get to that chart, you'll see some of the process. And then later had the opportunity to become a plant manager, which meant at that role, I had to work with the entire team, trying to help everyone achieve their goals of making sure we had a safe quality product on time going through the doors. I did that for a number of years. And again, an opportunity opened up and I moved into selling and logistics. And it was interesting because I really didn't know very much about selling. So I was on an extremely large learning curve. But the experience that I had, and that will be a little bit of a theme of my comments, the experience that I had from my previous roles laid down a foundation that actually helped me in ways that a number of people in selling didn't have that background. So I had a lot to learn, but as I did, it really helped me with my background. So the selling becomes more of a function of, okay, so we've got all of this stuff that we've made. Now, how do we get it sold to someone and moved to there? Partly it's starting new business, but oftentimes it's relationship selling with existing business, solving problems, maybe trying to sell a new item. And the logistics, I don't know if you guys have ever heard that term or not. In the old days, we called it distribution, but it's kind of a fancy way of saying the driving and the moving of the product from our facility once it's sold to someone that's bought it. And that's an extremely interesting and complicated and technical field. And particularly in the perishable business that dairy is, it's already going bad by the time you made it. It's got a 20-day shelf life. You want to have it on a shelf where it's still got 10 days or more. And so getting it moved efficiently through the system was the important part of that role. Later, I had the opportunity to work as a general manager and regional managers in various roles. Again, the experiences from those prior roles all stacked on top of each other and really made a huge difference. So I can't emphasize enough, whatever role you're in now, there's a lot to learn, and you may be able to use that later to help you do other things. Once I got into those more regional roles, my role became a little less of specifically what's my cost and did I get the stuff through the door, or how am I going to go get this sold? It became more of pulling an entire team together, and not just the cost or the price, but also, are we making any money? It became the P&L, and it became personnel working with people. So it was an interesting thing. And the one comment I would make to you about all of that, beyond, learn everything you can about what you're doing right now, is change, because I just can't emphasize enough how much everything will change. A lot of people view change as a negative, and sometimes it's not the best thing that ever happened, but frequently change is good. And change always creates an opportunity to create something better for those that will. So I would encourage you not to be afraid of change, and you probably need to learn to embrace change, because you will see it. It's no telling what we'll see 50 years from now when you guys are in the general age group I'm in. Okay, Gretchen, if you. So here's a bit of a simple diagram of a milk processing, milk plant receiving. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, there's really two pictures. The one on the far left is a little more old style, smaller truck, and there's a lot of that still going on. There's a lot of farms that are still out there with 100 or 200 cows, and some of the smaller tankers will pick them up. Many farms, and I think most of you, if not all of you, are from Texas. Many of the farms in Texas are now congregating in the Lubbock, Amarillo, Clovis, New Mexico area, and it's just huge. And I mean, there's farms up there with 5,000 and 10,000 head of cattle. You can see in the center picture up there, the tanks, it's a full-blown tanker. The tanks are large, everything's stainless steel. It's almost a factory. And it's critical that they do a good job because they've got too much invested to have their product turned down. So the next phase begins to contemplate inbound milk screening. A lot of the farms actually do some of their own now as well, but certainly every plant in our network, and I think all plants, screen their milk on an inbound basis for a number of quality issues. Temperature, obviously, because you want milk to be cold. Acidity, those of you in chemistry classes can see the titratable acidity beaker sitting there. You want to test the acidity to see if it's begun to spoil. Cryoscope in the process of moving product around and cleaning equipment. There's always a chance of getting a little bit of water. There's a very tight window of how much water can be in there. And so a cryoscope to make sure the water's right. Fat and protein and solids and all sorts of tests are done. Antibiotics is a critical one to make sure that cows that were treated with antibiotics were nowhere near the milking barn. Entire tanker loads of milk were rejected if somehow there's an accident, and those are put in place to catch those. So all of those tests are done, and if it passes all of those tests, then you can see in the bottom kind of left-hand corner, there's a truck backed up, and that's essentially what it looks like, backed up and being pumped into a plant through a unit to cool it down and measure how much there is into those big silo tanks, and it's ready to go. If you want to go to the next one, Gretchen. I guess one comment I was going to make too, if you've ever driven by a dairy, the majority of the big tall tanks probably contain raw milk. There's some tanks that'll be a little bit shorter generally that have pasteurized milk, and we'll talk about pasteurized milk in a minute. But then there's also a lot of other stuff going on. There's tanks that hold resin beads for making plastic bottles. There's tanks that hold sugars, and in some cases even flavors and things like that. So a lot of tanks in a dairy plant. Pardon me. Now we're in the milk processing area. Upper left-hand corner, you can see the raw milk is coming in from those silos. And now once everything's like it's supposed to be, it enters the plant first into a balance tank that's constant level. And now there's a series of equipment that we do a number of things. Raw milk is usually somewhere around 4% fat. Those of you that, I don't know that any of you really would know about, really cream line milk, but if you don't do something with milk, the cream in milk is lighter than the skim and it begins to separate and it goes to the top, and they used to call that cream line. Today, almost all the time, milk is separated into cream and skim through a separator. And then the next piece of equipment is called an inline standardizer. And generally those are used then to blend it back into the product you want. So most of the fluid milks that you see on a store shelf, whole milk is 3.25%. There's a 2% of 1% and a skim, which is nearly fat-free, about as tight as a separator can get the skim milk out of. So those products would be blended back in. But in addition, there's items like chocolate milk or eggnog. A lot of companies make mixes for people like Dairy Queen or McDonald's or their own, or even ice cream mixes. Those are you take the blended product back, you'll add ingredients like chocolate powder or sugar or flavoring. And then from that point, it goes through, and in the fluid milk items, vitamins are added. I want to talk about that for a second. So vitamin A is a naturally occurring vitamin in milk. It's been there since day one. When low-fat products began to become popular 30 or 40 years ago, it was evident that as the fat was taken out, the vitamin A content was going down because vitamin A is a fat-soluble vitamin. So the government determined that milk was the right carrier to ensure that the vitamin A level stayed the same. And so vitamin A is actually added back to 2%, 1%, and skim to replace the vitamins that came out when the fat was taken out. And then another vitamin D, years and years ago, even I think maybe before my time, children had a problem with a disease called rickets, and it was a bone degeneration disease. And essentially it kept the bones from putting on calcium and things like that if there was a deficiency of vitamin D. And so it ensured children had enough vitamin D in their diet. Vitamin D was added in milk too. So vitamins A and D are added, they're regulated, and it's a regulated important process. And then homogenization is the process where the fat's broken up so that it won't float to the top. So when you open your gallon of milk, whatever level you've got, you pour it out, it looks consistent. The homogenizer probably does more to achieve that than anything. once that's all done now, it's got to be pasteurized, and we'll talk about pasteurization in a second, but that is a smaller unit, but that unit contains essentially all the components of a pasteurizer. Once it comes out of there, it goes into a storage tank, and then it's packaged, in this case, in glass bottles. Most of the time today, it's in gallon or half-gallon plastic, various types of pints and quarts, and then schools typically still have a lot of paper. Okay. So this is one view of a heat exchanger, or an HTST, and that's an acronym for high temperature short time pasteurization. So what's going on in here? A lot of moving parts. I want to make one comment too. This is one of the most highly regulated pieces of equipment probably in the food industry, and certainly the most in a dairy plant. Depending on the plant, the systems and whatever, there's probably at least 4 to 6 regulated seals on this piece of equipment, regulated by the state, because this process takes raw milk, and we'll talk about some of the problems with raw milk as far as consumption in a minute, but it takes raw milk and turns it into pasteurized milk. So the way it works is the raw milk goes into that balance tank we saw earlier, and it's pumped into this heat exchanger. You follow the flow that Gretchen's showing, and right there in the middle is a section called the regenerator section. It's a highly energy efficient and also environmentally friendly process, where it takes the cold milk coming in, and we'll get to the hot milk in a minute, but the cold milk coming in actually cools down the hot milk, and the hot milk coming back out warms up the cool milk. So we're actually warming up the cool milk in the regenerator section. It goes in, there's a homogenizer. Typically the separator's in there as well. And inline blending's probably done in there. And then it goes into the heater section, where it's heated up to pasteurization temperature, and it's held, or it passes through a holding tube. The only purpose of the holding tube is essentially to ensure that the amount of time the milk is at the pasteurization temperature is met. So those holding tubes are engineered to be designed to hold for X number of seconds. We'll talk about that briefly in a second too. So basically we've gotten into the heating section where we've got the milk up above 160 degrees. We go through and we hold it for more than 15 seconds. And now we're going back in and we're cooling it down in the regenerator section. And then we're cooling it further down in that chilled water section with all the blue, dark blue. And it comes out, if it's pasteurized, then it will go on to the pasteurized milk tank. If the sensors and sealed equipment determines that it's not pasteurized, then it'll go back to the milk tank and start the process over until they get the system fixed and it's pasteurized. So very, very important piece of equipment in a dairy plant. Skilled operators operate these pieces of equipment. They frequently work with blending and things like that too. So they'll help blend products together. They'll run it through the pasteurizer. The operators that run these HTST operations are typically some of the more high paid. They're very skilled and critical people in a dairy plant. In many cases, they've actually even been certified by the state to run that equipment. So it's a really important job. If you'll go to the next one. So what is pasteurization? So a gentleman named Louis Pasteur in the mid 1800s determined that there were bacteria in products that were causing it to sour, go bad, taste bad, and people didn't really understand why. And so his research initially just determined that by boiling liquid or heating it up, they could slow down or stop that process. So that was the initial part of pasteurization. Later, they were able to determine that bacteria that cause diseases and in some cases death and physical harm were also in some products, and if heated up to the right temperatures, they could be killed, and then the product would be rendered safe. So it might spoil eventually, but it wouldn't have dangerous bacteria in it. So Louis Pasteur actually invented pasteurization, which is what we use in dairy, but he also actually changed the industry and in some ways the world by helping find a way to eliminate bacteria that can cause us a lot of harm. So really important person, really important process. So why is that necessary? You can read at the top, the FDA and other health agencies, such as the Center for Disease Control and organizations such as the American Association of Physicians, agree that raw milk is unsafe because it can contain disease-causing pathogens, including, and I'm sure some of you have heard of staph, you've heard of salmonella, E. coli, listeria, tuberculosis, brucellosis. Yersinia pectus is kind of a cousin to Yersinia enterocolitica. So, I mean, none of that stuff is real good and none of it's your friend. So pasteurization or cooking, if you go home and cook, it's the same principle. You cook raw chicken or you cook eggs, it's the same principle. The process kills these bacteria. So once it's properly pasteurized, they can't crawl back in there. And so it's very safe. So if you go to the next one, so what is pasteurization? We're kind of repeating what we already said in a minute, but you start with raw milk, you separate into cream and skim, add your vitamins and homogenize and blend it all back, and you pasteurize it to the proper temperature, then you cool it to the proper temperature. Once you've done that, it's pasteurized, and then you can package it. So it again, like we just said, destroys the dangerous microorganisms which can grow in milk. So pasteurized milk is safe, and that makes us feel real good. So there's multiple types of pasteurization. The three main types. The left-hand side, the one we use in the industry that I'm in, the fresh fluid side, has a minimum legally of 161 degrees for 15 seconds. So if you'll remember that heater section, that holding tube, that heater section has to heat it up to at least 161. Nearly everybody goes higher than that. And for at least 15 seconds, and most people are typically longer than that. So the holding tube is going to have to be built to last or hold for at least 15 seconds to be legally pasteurized. State agencies come in on a regular, I think it's quarterly basis, to check equipment. It's very highly regulated. This product typically will last about 20 days. Ultra pasteurization heats it up hotter, holds it a little bit less. It uses a little bit more sophisticated packaging. It's a little more expensive process, so the product costs more, but they last typically 60 to 90 days. Some people don't like some of the unflavored stuff as much because it can have some cooked flavor from the high heat, but they're definitely very useful products in many applications where they're needed. You see that commonly, and I think Gretchen and I talked yesterday, I forgot to mention. So in the world I'm in, a gallon of Oak Farms milk or Hygiea milk in a Walmart or an HEB or an Albertsons or something like that would be the gallon, half gallon plastic bottle typically. The ultra high pasteurized stuff, you'll see that a lot in organic, some of the alternative oat milk, soy milk, some juices, specialty stuff, I think Mootopia and things like that. You'll see that in that kind of packaging. Then the ultra high temperature stuff, which is usually shelf-stable, 2 to 3 or nearly 300 degrees, 2 to 6 seconds. So it's actually hotter and longer, a little bit more cooked. This stuff can be shelf-stable for 4 to 6 months. So it lasts longer. Again, the packaging is a little more sophisticated. So all of the processes that we just went through, a variation of that same thing goes through all those. Now, here's some examples of some of the products. If you're in our market, San Antonio or the Valley, or Dallas for that matter, in Houston, you'll see Oak Farms labels, and True Moo's our national chocolate brand. We're coming out with a new strawberry flavored brand or milk in that brand. There'll be some other items over the years. Hygiea is the label we use down in the Rio Grande Valley, Corpus Christi, Laredo. Those are all fresh fluid products. Most of those are made in our San Antonio plant right here, and obviously our other plants too. And they'll have about 20 days shelf life. You go to the next slide. The 60 and 90 day shelf life, dairy pure, half and half, whipping cream, things like that. You'll find those again in those same stores. They've got typically a longer shelf life. Now, a lot of times once you open them, they're suggesting they be used within a few weeks, but they'll sit in your refrigerator for a long, long time. Most of the time you see those in a store, you'll have 40 days or more, even though it takes a little time to get through the system. Those are the extended shelf life milks. And then the shelf stable on the next one, you see Dairy Pure there, True Moo, there's some shelf stable product. I use some, I think it's called Pure Protein shakes from time to time for various reasons. And you'll see things like that in the shelf stable product. Some of these things last even a year, but they last a long time on the shelf without refrigeration until you open them. And those are the products. So there's that. So if anybody's got any questions, I would welcome them, but I want to talk for a second, just generally about the operations. And this is, there's no real clean way to put everything on here. This is almost an eye chart as it is, but just to give you some ideas of some of the different opportunities in our industry and other industries, I'm sure look very much just like this. There's just, the world is yours out there, and as you go into your future. In this particular case, and I'm going to talk about what do you like to do in a minute, but what do you like to do might not be a bad place to start. in some of these. So I tried to break it down, looking at it from that way. Operations is kind of a, how does the milk get into a package? And it usually starts all the way from receiving the raw ingredients to processing, doing something with them, to packaging them, to moving them to what we call a cooler, a cold storage area, have it ready to go. We've got filler operators. We've got processors who also do a lot of blending. We've got warehousing people, cooler handling people, that somebody's got to put it away when it comes in. Somebody's got to pull it out and load it out when it goes out. Engineering and maintenance are not always the same thing. Engineering sometimes is designing how the stuff is going to flow. Although there's frequently some repair involved, but maintenance is keeping it going. You know, and our goal is always to be preventative and keep it going. But things happen in this world, and when they break, then our maintenance teams rush in and try to get it back up and running as quickly as they can. And then various levels of management at every step along the way. Management to me is more about helping, but it's also certainly about regulating too. But management for all the various steps along the way, including a plant manager who tries to pull the whole thing together at a good cost and a good quality. And then right below that, and they're like cousins, but typically we keep them separate because we don't really want the urge to get it out the door to affect our view on quality. So quality and environmentally people typically kind of have a little different channels that they report up through, but they work together constantly to make sure that all the stuff going through the plant from start to finish is at the right quality. And the same thing with environmental. I mean, we've got all kinds of things that we don't want to spill on the ground, go down the storm drain, or go into the air. And so there's a lot of people. So if you love technical things, you know, the quality is all kinds of testing, a lot of data interpretation. There's also a lot of people communication skills involved in that. And environmental the same way. Our dairies are typically some of the most regulated things in the industry. EPA, OSHA, USDA, FMO, I mean, just on and on and on. Logistics, I talked about that earlier, is getting product efficiently from one place to another. And we've got all kinds of drivers and schedulers, fleet maintenance, keeping the equipment running, and then management. Finance people, they're the ones that keep track of the numbers and the money. So if you're really into numbers and spreadsheets and things like that, there are incredibly intelligent and neat people in our organizations that keep track of things. Clerks, cost accountants, controllers, try to pull the whole thing together. Human resources, we always tease them about being the police, but typically human resources in our industry are the folks that help us kind of keep the people thing, which is the most important thing in our business together. You know, the support, the benefits, the payroll, did they get paid what they're supposed to? Did they get all their benefits? Are we in compliance with all the federal and state laws? So human resources people from support level all the way through managers and directors are critical, and that's a whole discipline itself. Selling, I talked about earlier, it's not just about selling, it's also about relationship building and solving problems. That's probably the biggest thing that I've determined over the years with selling. Sales reps, managers, merchandisers, helping people. Some people don't want to put the stuff on the shelf themselves, and they ask us to do that. And then key account representatives work specifically with various customers. So all of these are a little bit different discipline. All of them take people that are excited and eager to be involved and learn. And then finally, management. And typically our managers come out of some or several of these groups and work their way up. And a manager is essentially somebody who's helping the team get things done. Talk about a problem solver. And there's some element of, hey, you have to do this, but it's mostly about trying to help people just get things done, work together, and at some level even make sure we're making money so that we can pay everybody's salaries and pay our bills. So there's a lot of opportunities in dairy. They all build upon each other. And I'm really excited about that. So Gretchen, next thing. Okay, and then finally, and I think we're going to be close to what we said we'd be. Maybe I'm a little long, so I'll hurry up. But, you know, thoughts from an old guy, laughing with Susan a minute ago. I don't know what point in my life I determined, I always heard the term old ag, and I always thought it was somebody else. And at some point I woke up one day and said, oh my gosh, I am one. So the other thing that occurred to me as we started into this is, you know, I'm on my way out of the industry, and I've been so grateful for the things this industry's done for me and allowed me to do. You guys are on your way in. And so I just thought for a second, it might be might be helpful. At least that's my intention, to just give you a couple of thoughts and then wish you the very best. So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, on my way in to A&M, I didn't really have a great idea of what I was going to try to do. And I think that's pretty normal. And I don't think there's anything wrong if you're in that same boat. But I didn't want to just plant the seed. There's nothing wrong with dreaming a little bit too. There's nothing wrong with thinking ahead. And particularly what I would encourage you to do is start with what you like to do. I would say there's a doggone good chance you won't end up doing what you start doing. And that's probably good. But because things evolve and you'll evolve and people evolve. But if there's stuff you like to do and stuff you don't like to do, then on the stuff you like to do, figure out where I can go do some of that and think ahead if you've got time to do it. I would encourage you to do that. That's number one. Number two, you'll see many changes in your career. I think that's good. That's really where the opportunity is. I think when I was younger, I used to worry about that. It bothered me more. But actually, as I look back, whether it was me or someone else, a friend, a lot of times the real opportunity for someone came in change. Somebody, are you the one that can figure out how to navigate our way through this? Do you like to solve problems? Do you like to work with people? Do you like people? I would encourage you to embrace change, not be afraid of it, but also expect it. And then finally, the last comment I would make, it's kind of a two-part. Skills and good attitudes are always in demand. I just wish I had $1 for every time over the years that I've just felt so encouraged by somebody that came in with a great attitude and just had an idea and helped get something done. You know, I'm sitting there with a group of people sitting there not sure what to do. And then, you know, it happens over the years. People come in and just complain and stuff. I can tell you one gets you a lot more than the other. So that was the first one. Is I would say on the job, be curious and think of every job as a step toward the next. I really think that's important. I really think that'll make a difference. And then the final one is just kind of a freebie. You know, like I said, I'm an old guy and I read a lot of stuff and I'm kind of past all of this, but I read every day about how many young people, and they're 10, 15 years older than you probably, how many young people just have mountains of college debt that they can't get out from under. And it's changing their lives. You guys are on the way into this. You haven't gotten to that spot yet, probably. And my suggestion with you is I think college is a great option. I wouldn't trade it. And if you can make that work and it's for you, I would encourage you to do that. So this is not about college, pro or con, but I would tell you that over the years, I've seen some really good leaders. I've worked for some really good leaders that did not go to college and were some of the best leaders that I ever met. And they were curious and they were thinking of things and they understood how it worked together, like I talked about earlier. I've also worked for some people that did. So that's not the point. But the point is there's lots of ways to learn and there's lots of ways to do it. And the only comment I would make there, and I'll end right there, is I would be careful before you borrow. I'm not saying that's bad, but just kind of think through, how am I going to pay this back? Will I be able to pay this back? So that's kind of a freebie. Hope it helps. Anyway, in the meantime, again, Gretchen and Haley and Susan, thank y'all very much. And I'm going to go to mute and listen for questions.
Thank you, Glenn. That was a great just presentation about dairy processing. And then just, you know, I think even more so just how you approached your career. And I think that that is so important for this group. And I would just add to that in terms of just advice, you know, don't burn bridges. And what I mean by that is you never know who you're going to encounter again in your career that you've maybe worked with previously. So you should always, you know, build bridges, not burn bridges. And then secondly, I would say find a mentor. I think mentors are so important. And that's why we've got our contact information there. Even if you've got a question that doesn't involve dairy, Glenn and I are more than happy to talk through things. You know, we've been in our careers for a while. So we want to pass that knowledge along. So I just, you know, offer that up as well. So I'll pass it over to Susan for questions.
Yeah, really great information from both of you. Thank you so much. I will say that there was a slide early on about sustainability and things that cows can be fed that would normally go into the compost or the trash. And I found that incredibly interesting. I did not know that. So thank you for that nugget of knowledge. Does it look like we have any questions specific to the presenters? If we do, please go ahead and put them in there, or you can email them later to Haley and she can get them out to Gretchen and Glenn. I would like to remind everyone that this is being recorded and it will live on our website, txrestaurant.org. And also in education news, we have our scholarships are going to be coming up. We've extended the deadline for the scholarships that the TRA and the foundation offer to April 30th. So you'll have an opportunity to get information, both of these scholarships. They will be online, hopefully by the end of today, if not tomorrow. And educators, I really encourage you to have the students do these. They can do them all online. Get with your language arts teachers on the essays. See if you can make this a graded, graded report so that, when the judges start to read them, they're not reading common mistakes. Spell check doesn't catch everything. But make them complete and accurate. It must be complete. And I know that Gretchen has a scholarship that they also have offered at the post-secondary level. So we will make that announcement as well to that group of people. Any other comments or questions? If not, then I am gonna let everybody get on with their day. Gretchen, did you have any final thoughts? Are you good?
Good. Just thanks for having us.
All right. Well, thank you again for Classroom to Career, and we will see you next month, the first Wednesday of the month at 11 a.m. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.